Welcome children. Today we are going to start with first chapter of your Hornbill book, The Portrait of a Lady. This story is written by Khushwant Singh and it is autobiographical in touch. Means Khushwant Singh has written instances from his own life. It is his actual story with his own grandmother. So for this reason, it becomes important that we should know a little about Khushwant Singh's life. So let us try to know a little about the author. Khushwant Singh is undoubtedly one of the great Indian writers writing in English today. He is not only a novelist but also a reputed journalist. Born in 1915, he went to England to study law. He also joined Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. He also served All India Radio for some time. He got his name and fame as the editor of the Illustrated Weekly of India. Later, he edited Yojana, New Delhi, and the Hindustan Times. He travelled widely and had wide exposure to life. He is author of many memorable works of literature like Train to Pakistan, a moving account of India's partition, I Shall Not Hear the Nightingale, Delhi, The Company of Women, History of Sikhs, etc. His syndicated columns with malice towards one and all, and above all in various newspapers, are very popular among the masses. Next point is introduction. Before starting the chapter, let's have an overview in the form of introduction. The Portrait of Lady provides a vivid account of Khushwant Singh's relationship with his grandmother. It describes the various turning points in their relationship. Their friendship was most intimate when the author lived with his grandmother in the village. When they moved to city, the urban way of life and modern education in a convent school weakened the bond of their friendship. The author's realistic account makes us think of our own relationship with our grandparents. The grandmother in the story, in fact, a universal figure of selfless maternal love. Next, we need to know about the characters. Let us see, there are two characters in the whole story. One is the narrator who is narrating the whole story, and second is his grandmother. So grandmother is really very important character in the story. So let's know a little detail of the character of grandmother. The author's grandmother was an old, short, fat lady. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles. Always dressed in white, telling the beads of her rosary, she seemed a picture of perfect serenity. The grandmother was a religious lady. She visited the village temple daily and read the scriptures. She was not only gentle and polite, but also kind and generous. In the village, she fed the dogs with stale chapatis, and in the city, she fed the sparrows. The sparrows often sat on head or shoulders, but she never shooed them away. The grandmother was a responsible and caring lady. She looked after the author well in village. She took interest in what was taught to him. In the city, though she disliked music being learnt by the author, she kept quiet. She viewed music as monopoly of heralds and beggars. She was of the opinion that education must be religion-based. The grandmother was practical and realistic. She did not behave sentimentally when she saw the author of the station. When the author returned, she went to railway station to receive him. She felt extremely happy. When her end was near, she rightly sensed it, and she stopped talking. She died in inaudible prayer. Next, let us have a look at the title of the story. The title of the story is really appropriate. The Portrait of a Lady. The focus is on the grandmother from beginning to end. So it is giving the portrait of grandmother from beginning to end. So title is really apt one. In a true sense, it is a vivid portrait of the grandmother. The author gives a detailed account of the life and personality of a person with whom he had a long emotive association. By giving her graphic portrait, he seems to pay his tribute to his old friend who had a great influence on him. So this is the title. Then comes the theme or the message of the story we are going to read about. The Portrait of a Lady is basically a pen portrait of the author's grandmother. Means he is telling all the details of his grandmother. It does not have any explicit message. Means you can't find any very important message or something like that. It is his personal account of his life. It only underlines the fact that a truly religious person is always calm and composed, kind-hearted and generous. Such a person was author's grandmother. She was a thoroughly religious person. She had compassion and affection for all. She generously fed to dogs and sparrows. The author also hints at the generation gap as he refers to his grandmother's objection to the absence of any teaching of scriptures in his new English school and her particular antipathy to the music. So this is the theme. Theme is the central idea around which the whole story revolves. So before doing story, we should always know what is the theme of the story or what message the story gives, so that when we read it, we can correlate. Next comes the summary. A little bit of the summary. Let us have a look, and then we will start the text of the whole chapter word by word. Let's have a look at the summary. The chapter The Portrait of a Lady is the story of the author and his grandmother. The grandmother was an old woman with a wrinkled face. The author had always seen her like this for the past 20 years. So she appeared to be so old that he could not imagine her being young and pretty. Someone who had a husband, means he couldn't imagine that that ever in her life she would be young and ever in her life she would be having a husband. So he thought that forever she was like this only, because he has observed her for past 20 years and he thought that she was always like this. She was short, fat and slightly bent. The author had seen his grandfather's portrait, an old man with a turban and a long white beard covering his chest. So, portrait he has seen of his grandfather, but not in reality. To the author, his grandfather didn't seem like a man who could have a wife and children. But someone who could have lots and lots of grandchildren. So he has seen his grandparents very old, and he was not able to even imagine that they were ever young or they were ever the persons who should have children. He thought that they are so old, and he considers that maybe they have been so old that they could only have grandchildren and no children. His grandmother used to move around the house in spotless white. Means always she used to wear white, and it was spotless white, with her one hand resting on her waist and her other hand counting the beads of the rosary. In the initial days, the author and his grandmother had a good relationship. She used to wake him up and get him ready for school. She used to pack the things required by him for the day and walked him to school every day. She used to visit the temple that was attached to the school. She had a routine of reading the scriptures. The author, along with other children, sat on the veranda singing alphabets and morning prayers. They both used to come back home together. Who both? The grandmother and the author. They used to come back together. In the morning, they used to go together, and in the afternoon, they used to come together, with stray dogs roaming around them, as his grandmother would carry the stale chapatis to feed them. Soon, the parents of the author who went to the city to settle in, and they called them. As they reached the city, who? The grandmother and the author. When they reached the city, his relationship with his grandmother took a turn. Though they shared the room, their bond grew apart. He started going to an English medium school, and she no longer accompanied him to his school as she used to visit in the village. So here she was not allowed in the school, and there were no longer stray dogs who roamed around them while walking back home. She, however, used to ask him about his day and what he had learned. She didn't understand anything, as everything was in another language which she could not understand. So in city also, she made a routine that she used to ask him about his day's activities and what he has learned in the school. But because everything was in English and nothing was related to religion or scriptures, so she was not able to understand. But still, in order to keep the bond intact, she used to ask him. She didn't approve of the new syllabus that he was studying, because she thought that they did not teach him about God and the scriptures. They saw less of each other with each passing day. As the days passed, he grew older and soon went to the university. He had his own room. Now the room they were sharing, they also got separated, and now he had his own room, and this made their relationship sour. She stopped talking to everyone and spent her whole day sitting at her spinning wheel, reciting prayers and moving the beads of the rosary with one hand. However, she loved feeding sparrows in the veranda at dawn. Breaking bread into pieces and feeding it to the birds was her daily routine. The birds would sit on her legs, her head, some even on her shoulders, but she never shooed them away. Soon, the author decided to go abroad for further studies. She came to the railway station to leave him off, and she was not at all sentimental. Continuously recited her prayers, and her mind lost in the prayers, and she kissed him on the forehead before saying goodbye. After 5 years, as the author returned home, she was there again, came to pick him at the station, and was still the same as she had been 5 years ago. Same old. She clasped him within her arms and didn't say a word. She still used to feed her sparrows. One day, she didn't recite her prayers. Means it was the same very day when our author returned. So she, in her excitement, she didn't recite her prayers, but instead collected the women of the neighborhood and got a drum and started singing, because she couldn't contain her joy that her grandson has returned. So she celebrated this way, and on that evening she didn't recite her prayers, rather she collected some women from the neighborhood and she got a drum and she started singing and beating that drum. Though she considered music or singing or beating drum really lower thing, she didn't consider it to be a religious, a good thing, but on that day, out of excitement, she did the same thing. The next morning, she was ill with mild fever because she took so much exertion on that day that she fell ill. The doctor said that there was nothing to worry about, but she was sure that her end was near. She didn't want to waste her time talking to anyone in the family anymore, but spent her last hours in reciting her prayers, laying on the bed. She died, and so her body lay on the bed, lifeless. As they prepared for her funeral, they saw all the sparrows sitting in the veranda around her and mourning at her death. So this is all about the story. Means something like this you are going to get in the story. So just adapt your brain, just get ready for this type of story, and we will start the text of this chapter tomorrow. Word by word explanation we will do. Till that time you just revise this whole video and go through the characters and their details and the storyline, so that tomorrow you find it easy to understand the text of the chapter. Have a fruitful day. Take care, children.